afternoon, everyone. So I just wanted to ask you how many invasive species do you think you can see in this picture? So this is inside Mokurthi National Park. It's part of the national park. So there's one very obvious one, and it's also like what the DFO was saying, and what Robin mentions also. It's the invasion front of acacia wattle, and where it's weak, and this is where it's best to attack it and push it back. But how many more invasive species do you think are here? Yeah, so there are close to six more, including goss and broom. And the more interesting ones are the grasses that are invasive over here. So a lot of this bright green are invasive grasses. And it's not just one, there are several. So one of the grasses is called Vulpia myuros, and that's an invasive species. And the problem with it is that it's not palatable. And so non-palatability is a huge issue, especially with invasive species. And so what happens is when the grassland gets invaded, and once it turns from being a grassland to a forest, then there are these shade-loving grasses that grow underneath, and Vulpia myros is one of them, especially in the entire Korakunda range. Vulpia myros is taken over. So once you remove the invasive species, once you remove wattle, it looks like there's grassland below, but it's actually this grass and another grass also, which you commonly find. It's called Eragrostis nigra. So Eragrostis nigra brings us to a very interesting phenomena also. It's like a lot of general native species, or what they call cosmopolitan species, which are found in all over the world in temperate locations. These are species that are found in disturbed areas, but then they become invasive when there is an opportunity. So these are the grasses that dominate in places like this. And this is just an example of how close we have to look, and that it's much more complex than just a single species and removing a single species. And as you can see, the sambar are there, but palatability is a huge issue because Eragrostis nigra and another grass, which is in fact native, which also spreads when there are tree invasions. So there is a huge amount of work that needs to be done to bring this back to healthy grasslands, especially in places like inside the national park where it's really needed. Over here, this grass that you see here is called Pennisetum clandestinum. And probably this is the single most abundant plant in the Nilgiri Plateau. It must be more abundant than tea and even black wattle. And that's how extensive it is. And this is inside Mokurthi National Park. And that's how fast it's spreading and it's taking over. And I've shown this photo to show you the difference of how it grows compared to a native tussock grass. The native grasses are all mostly tussock grasses, and Pennisetum grows like a mat, and it takes over the ground. It doesn't allow other species to grow, native species to grow. Mostly, it doesn't allow it. And as it gets eaten, it spreads further and further. So these are the complexities that we deal with when it comes to invasive species. So in locations, especially close to the national park, close to places where uh, grasslands still remain and shola grasslands still remain, these are the places where we have to do more scaled up action in removing all of these invasive species and trying to do replanting in a larger scale. And coming to the next slide and continuing to talk about Pennisetum clandestinum. So these species, they do have a role also. Like without Pennisetum clandestinum, like we don't know how much of soil from the Nilgiris would have gotten washed away, because these are first responders. They're the first responders that grow when there's heavy disturbance. And in this image, you can see it's Scotch broom and gorse and Pennisetum. So in many places, these are the ones that are holding on to some soil when there's large infrastructure projects going on and steep road cuts that are happening. And it's preventing those major landslides happening and other mishaps happening. So this also brings us to the question of um, could invasive species also have a role when so much of changes are happening, especially with climate change and with so much of disturbance happening, and they do follow the heels of disturbance. So I think we have to prioritize in places where close to the national park, where there are still tracts of intact shola grassland remaining, tracts of the other forest types that are remaining, we have to focus on maximum efforts of restoration there. And in other places, the efforts have to be more concentrated. If we are removing the Pennisetum and the gorse and the broom here, we have to immediately replant with a lot of close planting, which is what we do in a lot of our projects. We plant very close and we try and mimic the structure so that the invasives are kept out. But we just cannot remove and leave it because there is the problem of erosion and other issues. So in completely destroyed areas, we have to increase the effort in concentrated spaces and replant more. Whereas in other places closer to where intact habitats are, we can scale up and have a more dispersed action. That's what we have learned in all these years of working and across 80 different sites where we've been working on dealing with invasives and restoration. So this is a image from my book actually, and it shows the complex that invasive species form to completely keep out native species. We do know that native species are coming back in some spaces, like underneath eucalyptus plantations, for instance, if a shola is nearby. And only certain eucalyptus species, like the Eucalyptus globalus, which is blue gum, whereas it wouldn't come under Eucalyptus camaldulensis. So it's very site-specific, species-specific, and but yes, regeneration is happening in many places, and it's been reported in the Pennies also, and people have been speaking about it. But then when complexes like this form, almost 7 different invasive species here. This is Solanum mauritianum. There's gorse. This is Pennisetum clandestinum kikui grass. There's broom, and there's wattle, and there's eucalyptus. So all of this together, like, it's extremely difficult for native species to come back. And what we do is try and mimic this structure, and we use a lot of shrubs and the species of the ecotone. So the ecotone is the species that grow between a shola and grassland, and they are naturally adapted to taking pressures better. And they are fire resistant. Most of them are fire resistant, and most of them are designed to take heavy winds and pressures and maintain the microclimate of a shola. So we focus a lot on the ecotone species and to try and mimic this structure so that to reduce further invasions. And that's a approach that we're trying to propose across ecosystems and ecotypes, which is the ecotone approach. And we are practicing, putting into practice and trying to learn more about it. The ecotone exists in across ecotypes. And so we believe that this is an approach that would probably stem from the Nilgiris to the world. And that's something that we are working on. So this is the kind of planting that we do, where we try to mimic the structure to bring back the native species. Again, like you said, 10 slides, so I put all the photos into one slide. And oh, yeah, okay. So we're using a lot of shrubs, Kurunjis, Strobilanthes, Zenkeriana, and this is the golden Kurunji. We've been giving names to a lot of the plants so that it becomes popular also. So we call this the golden Kurunji. There's another copper Kurunji and silver Kurunji, and so so what we've noticed is the more shrubs that we use, the restoration is more successful. And another very big hero are rocks. Rocks are really good in making restoration successful, and native plants just love rocks. And I think Professor Sukumar also was also asking if there are any species extinctions. I think rocks are one of the main reasons why a lot of species still remain, and many critically endangered species are found next to rocks. So if you have rocks, just preserve them, take some native plants and plant them. They will be there. Like invasive species won't. It's a big advantage if you have rocks. So these are more images of how we deal with the invasive pressure. And there are some compositions of grasses which do better also in keeping out invasives. And we focus a lot on, of course, the pollinator species, and pollinators, of course, are also our biggest allies, like rocks. They are the ones that then spread the plants further. And it's already started to happen in sites where they've started spreading from where we planted. Cestrum is also something that we deal with a lot in a lot of our sites. And it's not just the smaller invasive species. And similarly, we try and recreate the structure of a shola forest. It's not just the grassland. And for that, we replant the entire ecosystem and ecotype of the shola. And these are some examples of a regrown shola after removing cestrum and tea and solanum. And the trees have grown really tall in some of our earliest sites. And so we plant the impatiens that grow inside the shola, we plant the bamboo, and especially near the streams, which are very vulnerable. And we've noticed that, yes, there are some invasives coming back, but then the regeneration is much stronger, and with little more push, that the restoration is actually really successful. So I'd like to just end with this slide, and this is actually from the picture in the background is from a site in Kalhati, and over here we didn't give any care at all. It's being eaten by everything, including elephants. And so for the last 6 years, there's been no care. The fencing has been broken by the elephants, but the native species have withstood, and they're growing. And despite all the invasive pressure, also. And yes, in some of the sites, bisons are regularly visiting, and they are eating the grasses, and the change is happening. Of course, yes, invasive species are there also, but we have noticed that with that initial push, that the native species are always rooted, and they are there, and that there is hope, and we just have to give it the attention that's needed.